Good morning, everyone. I'm Heidi Gardner of Harvard University. Until a month ago, I was at Harvard Business School, but as Chris is telling us, the MBA is going out of fashion very quickly, so I decided to switch, jump ships, and I'm now at Harvard Law School. And I've written the paper such as it is. So far, it's more of an abstract and a set of concepts that we would like to introduce you to today with Andrew from Nordenflycht here and Forrest Briscoe, who wasn't able to join us at the last minute. But we're happy to be here today. We didn't know exactly this flow of 3 papers, then a question session, and indeed we have structured our 20 minutes anticipating that there would be questions during the presentation, during our talk, and we've ended it with a question to you. So we have not that many slides. We will aim to move through them and start by breaking all of the rules, which is happy to take any questions. I'm not sure I will have a great view of turned name tags, so if you actually want my attention, do the ooh thing as well. So let's get started. Wanted to share with you some data right at the beginning. And what we see here is data from a single law firm. I'll tell you more about that firm in a few minutes, but wanted to give you a sense of what was going on when you look at men versus women partners in a law firm and their book of business. So by book of business, we mean the amount of revenue that is generated by all of the clients that they quote unquote own. So they're the responsible partner, the relationship manager, the point of contact for this client, and this represents the amount of revenue that is brought in by themselves and anyone who works on those clients over time. Data is great in many ways because it often opens more questions than it answers. And so this is just our launching point for a series of questions that are in our minds. Overall, this trend of women's book of business being significantly smaller than their male counterparts is not an anomaly to this firm. This is not an evil firm that keeps women down. It's representative, for probably unfortunately, of the legal sector, and we can cite a number of research reports, a number of articles in the Wall Street Journal who they've found this pattern repeatedly across firms, across countries, and our question, of course, is why? How can we explain this? There are a number of explanations that we sought to rule out in our data straight away, and so what we can share with you is, at least at this firm, the explanation is not that women's book of business is smaller because they don't work as hard, right? So they are working about as many hours, 91% of the hours that their male counterparts do. Surprisingly, they're charging about the same rates. One of the recent studies that was released in the Wall Street Journal within the last few months showed that on average, women tend to charge less per hour. Women lawyers charge less per hour than their male counterparts, and we're not seeing that as an explanation in our data. And it's not that those who are working on their clients are charging lower rates. And indeed, it's not that the women have fewer clients that they're responsible for. So all of the kind of easy things that would initially signal, okay, this is the reason why, we would then been able to dig into the whys behind those. But it's not quite as simple as that. So the puzzle remains. If we step back for a minute, I mean, we are here at Brookings, what's the kind of so what in the bigger picture? How do we think about the book of business in a broader context? The book of business for a lawyer, as it is for many professionals, is very indicative of overall career success. It's both a cause and an outcome, many would argue, of career success. Rainmaking is the colloquial term for this, and those of us who study professions, who have worked in professional firms, know that rainmaking in many ways is it. That's what we care about. And so thinking about the book of business in terms of broader career success, if there is a major discrepancy between men and women, if there's the real gender implication for thinking about one's book of business, we need to be thinking of that as a broader issue for careers and career success from a gender angle. More specifically, when we think about books of business, there are a number of ways that we can think about how people actually get a book of business. And what we're going to be focusing on today is client transfers. Right? So if you want to build a book of business, what can you do? You can either develop new business. You can go out and prospect for new business. I was at McKinsey for 5 years, and we were never allowed to use the S word. We were never allowed to sell work. But in essence, that's what it is, right? You can go find new clients and sell them new work, or somehow you can take over clients that are already existing clients of the firm. And we're looking at that process now. For people who become partners, how is it that they take over existing clients? How does the transfer process work for them? There are, in principle, a number of different ways or times that a transfer would occur. So think of it at its most basic level. Somebody already owns a client. For an existing client, somebody is already working with that client, and we call that the incumbent partner. The incumbent partner might initiate a transfer under one of two basic circumstances. Either the incumbent partner stays with the firm or leaves. So if you think about the times when the incumbent owner stays with the firm, they might simply hand over that relationship to somebody else. Right? They might say, I am finished working on this client. God bless you, it's yours now. That kind of a substitution effect, one partner for another, is one way it might work. A second way it might work is if the partner stays with the firm, stays working on that existing client, and brings in a second partner in order to help with that client work. If that partner is in a different practice, in essence what they're doing is broadening the scope of activities that are delivered to that client. It's a way to complement one's expertise inside that client. Or the existing partner might stay on working with this client, might bring in a second partner from his or her own practice. In essence, they're reinforcing the team, they're broadening the scale of the team, but not necessarily going beyond the nature or the type of services that are offered. So those are three ways that transfers can happen, or circumstances under which they would happen if the owner is staying with the firm. If the owner is departing, oftentimes people depart for non-competitive situations. They could retire, they could become a judge, they could become an academic. In these sorts of instances, they very well may have a planned approach to hand off that client to somebody else within the firm to allow one of their colleagues to take on responsibility for serving that. We call that an inheritance event. When somebody is retiring, leaving the profession, somebody else who takes over that client inherits it. And lastly, somebody who leaves for a competitor, if within their firm they are able to retain that client as a client of the firm, a retention event. That's the last way we're considering that somebody might transfer within it. We are looking at inheritance here. We're focusing on the type of transfer when one partner leaves the legal profession, hands on that responsibility to a colleague. One of the reasons we think this is an important event is that aging is a process we can observe, right? Unlike many of these other, especially, imagine somebody leaving for a competitor. They're not going to broadcast very far in the future that that's their intent. They're not going to put a plan in place in order to hand off that client to somebody else. The firm is not going to be able really to prepare themselves necessarily for that particular event on a timing. So the inheritance event is really the only one of these where you might be able to predict on a very steady path when it will happen, who is likely to be at risk for that kind of transfer event. And that's what we're observing in our paper today, and that's what we're focusing on. So we don't know a lot about inheritance events. We don't know a lot about client succession overall, I would argue, in professional service firms. But there is one paper that we are able to turn to, and I'm going to cold call my co-author now to give us the highlight of that paper so we can know what we know about inheritance events thus far.
I'll say so the line there is that Forrest and I were looking at also law firm data and looking at when junior lawyers try to decide how they're going to build their careers, build their books of business, they have two paths to go for. One is try to inherit existing clients, as we're talking about here, or try to get new clients from outside. And one of the main findings, which was published in JPO this year, and thank you very much for the existence of that journal. So I think it's a really great place for it. Encourage you to all to read the paper and all papers in the history is it for female lawyers who would invest time in working with senior partners, partners close to retirement age, the more hours they bill to clients of senior partners close to retirement, the lower their future books of business, right? Which was in contrast to the case for male partners. So male partners who put in significant hours the more hours they would bill with senior attorneys, the larger their future book of business. And so this suggests to us maybe there's something very interesting that helps explain these the gender differences in books of business in the inheritance process and who wins clients of partners that are leaving the firm.
So with that background then, it leaves us with a number of research directions that we could pursue. And our goal in this particular study is twofold. One is to observe the actual internal client transfers in order to better understand the process overall. How does this happen and what are the outcomes? And then specifically to see if there is a gender difference in it. Are women disadvantaged in this process? And if so, how do we use that kind of finding to explain this bigger question that we started with? So what's our data that we're going to use? The first slide was part of this data set. It's a US headquartered AmLaw 100 firm. They have given us a set of billing data, personnel data, financial data, a sort of treasure trove of data lasting nearly a decade. And we have been looking at this data to understand these kinds of transfer events. The data includes transfers and includes lots of kinds of data for all partners, associates, and other timekeepers. So we know essentially the full range of who's been working on these clients. And there were more than 7,000 clients in our database over the time span. We also have extensive interviews with all levels of individuals inside this firm, executives, professionals, lawyers, and non-lawyers, and ongoing access. And we wanted to highlight the last point because we're hoping you're going to help us think through some research directions for this paper, and we think that we'll be able to continue to explore it. The answer is if we don't have the data to investigate that right now, we might be able to get it. So how do we go about looking at the role of gender in this inheritance event? Well, first we have to define essentially who is at risk of making a transfer. And specifically if we're talking about retiring, we're going to be looking at partners who are older. In the legal profession in the US, believe it or not, 55 is looking as older. As myself getting older and older, I find that remarkably young, in fact. But okay, so 55 was our cutoff point for what we considered to be, beginning to be at risk of a client transfer. Initially, we've defined all contenders, those who might inherit, as the group of people who have worked with this partner on any client, right? So a partner owns this client, gets to know all of the other partners who have worked with him or her across a range of clients, and you could imagine that they would then use that as their decisions, their sample set that they might hand over to. We can look at it in different ways. You could imagine perhaps the only people really who are going to inherit a client are those who have worked directly on this particular client in question. You might also think that actually any partner in the firm could be a contender for this. So we can think about it in different ways. The results I'll show you are using this definition now. And client transfers of this type involve just about 100 clients in our set. So that's the sample that we are working with for these sets of analyses. I hope you can see this from where you are. Here is what we are predicting, who won the tournament, who actually inherited the client. This means that we can observe in our data that person A for a given set of time was the client owner, and the transfer happens when person B, who wins this tournament, is brought on as a co-owner or a handover partner, and person B at that point is responsible as well for this client in the kind of official designation in the database. There are a number of predictors of who becomes the owner of the client or the co-owner of the client, whichever it was. First of all, they did, in fact, highly significant, they did work on that client previously before the transfer event, and they worked a significant proportion of partner hours on that client. Oftentimes they were in the same, significantly predictors whether they were in the same practice group. So if you remember the typology of transfer events that we had developed earlier, this is really one of those reinforcing events, or if it's a complete handover substitution when the partner retires, it goes to somebody most of the time in that partner's, the incumbent partner's same practice. We see that being female has a significant negative effect. So women are less likely to win this tournament to inherit clients. We see a small, sort of marginal but significant effect for the size of the clients that they're inheriting. So we're still left actually with a puzzle here. We are left with a puzzle in trying to explain that overall pattern of the women's discrepancy in the size of their book of business. One of the factors that we can say contributes to that is the degree or the extent to which women are winning these tournaments to inherit clients from retiring partners. And that is the sort of bold statement we can make at this point. We would absolutely welcome, I'm not sure how much time we have left, Chris. I know you'll keep us on track.
We have about 3-4 minutes.
3-4 minutes left. So we would welcome your feedback, ideas, suggestions.
So we go clip and then move it in and then start.
Thank you. Very nice presentation. I've read all these papers, and I have actually 2 comments on each one. It's the same comment, actually. So I'll give you the first comment that applies to this one. In all these papers, and one has to do this, there's no sort of way around this, you have to make a decision on what things you want to take as exogenous to your analysis and what things you want to explain as treat as endogenous. And what you're doing in this case is you are taking as exogenous the decision to be made partner. You're conditioning what you're doing on the fact that these people are 50 plus, whatever, and they are partner. Okay. But what's of course driving all of this is the endogenous outcome of how these people become a partner. Okay, which is going to be a function of observables and probably more importantly, unobservables. And it is generally the unobservables, that is the things you do not see, that enable them to become partner, that I would suspect are very powerfully correlated with everything else that happens after they become partner, including the type of business that they subsequently get as inheritance. And so, I mean, this is a much harder type of analysis to do. I'd be happy to talk with you about that in private.
Great.
Do it. But in writing this thing up, I think you want to condition and be very clear that you're conditioning on that outcome and how that could actually affect virtually everything you're doing, because that can run through all your results.
Absolutely. And indeed, we know that if we are interested in gender effects on anything and it's conditional on becoming partner, those two are deeply intertwined. So thank you for that, Cliff.
Yeah.
My sense from research we've done is that the decision to hand over a client, this probably is obvious, depends upon the confidence that the person who inherits will be able to keep that client for the firm. Mm-hmm. And that requires, to some degree, going to Cliff's point, it requires a set of traits, capabilities, and so forth that go beyond simply sort of legal proficiency, yeah, but a certain amount of interpersonal capabilities and so forth. But I would think that one variable that would give a partner confidence of another partner's ability to do that would be the track record of contact with junior partners with the client. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that someone comes in and simply works on, say, a tax matter, but really doesn't have any direct contact with the client, that person's going to be less likely, I think, to inherit than someone who comes in and has some significant contact. One proxy for that might be whether, and I don't know if you could get data like this, whether when there's a referral, let's say, or another client, another partner comes in, there is a new matter that's opened up. on that matter.
Mm-hmm.
There are billing codes for, I'm working on XYZ, merger of two companies, right? There's a regulatory dimension. And whether a new matter is opened up is often very much a matter of negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no objective criteria. And we know, certainly research suggests that women tend to be less aggressive in pushing for new matters to be opened up. And the significance of a new matter is that they then can get sometimes what's called origination credit,
mm-hmm.
sometimes handling credit,
Right.
that's reflected in their compensation. So to the extent you might be able to get at that, that could be a proxy for the extent to which someone has built up a relationship with a client that would give the senior partner some confidence that he or she could inherit that client and keep it for the firm.
So our preliminary results are consistent, absolutely, with what you've suggested, and I think that's why that would be the explanation for why both the number of hours working with this partner and the number of hours on this particular client would be significant predictors of who wins that tournament, because the first with the partner inspires that level of trust in their character and competence, and with the client suggests that they have had at least a greater likelihood of developing those relationships with the client as well. That makes sense.
So it occurs to me that as the moderator, I have this strange role where I have to actually stop things in order to enforce the rules that I made.
There you go.
So my apologies that I'm going to hold this until we've got time later.
I'm only 30 seconds.
You want to make your statement?
Yeah.
Go. Fast.
It may be that women historically and still today are channeled into particular areas of law to start with.
Ah.
So for example, if you're an employment lawyer, you only deal with HR. If you're an employment lawyer, you're never going to own a corporate client. And secondly, it doesn't matter how hard you work as an employment lawyer, you can't bill the premium as you can with an M&A deal.
Absolutely. So the pink ghetto argument, and we've explored that in our data as well. So far, it hasn't shown as significant when we've included controls for practice groups. Surprisingly, perhaps, that this seems to be equally likely to happen no matter which practice they're in, which kind of defies expectations. I completely agree. Thank you very much for the questions. I look forward to more.
Back to where my promise will come back. Thank you very much.